Bueno, muy buenas tardes. Siendo las 17:30 horas, les saluda el profesor Cristian Cristóful, coordinador del Departamento de Inglés del Instituto Superior de Lenguas, en calidad de moderador. Se da inicio a la defensa virtual de Tesina, acorde a la resolución número 1289/2022, que fija fecha y hora de la tesina con el título Assemble, Analysis of the Translation Strategies Used in Avengers, The Enemy Within, to Translate Humor and Onomatopoeia, a cargo de las autoras Paula Yamile Benítez Saavedra y Marina Victoria Correa Mosqueira, de la carrera de licenciatura en lengua inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lenguas. En calidad de presidenta del Tribunal Examinador, nos acompaña la doctora Valentina Canese. Muy buenas tardes, profesora Valentina.
Buenas tardes, profesor.
En calidad de miembros del Tribunal Examinador, las profesoras Romina Bento y Elena Núñez. Muy buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Postulantes universitarias, Paula Benítez, Marina Correa. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Buenas tardes.
Dejamos ahora a cargo de la presidenta el manejo de la defensa.
Well, Marina and Paula, we wish you much success with your defense. You have 30 minutes to present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we just proceed?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this thesis defense. We are Paula Benitez and Marina Correa. The research title today, presented today, is titled, as you heard, Assemble Analysis of the Translation Strategies Used in Avengers: The Enemy Within to Translate Humor and Onomatopoeia. We will now begin with part one, which will cover the introduction of this presentation. The field of translation has several branches. Among them, we can find legal, finance, and medical. Another branch is that of audiovisual translation, in which movies, TV shows, and series are included. However, there is one case in particular which is often overlooked, and is that of comic books, which is interesting because the nature of comic books makes them stand out from other types of media, as they present unique challenges such as typographical elements and spatial constraints. Comic book translation entails careful attention because of the specific characteristics and challenges they present, and the reason why it is important to take a look into a superhero comic book specifically is because of the growing interest in superhero media nowadays, and the interest of people in reading them can lead to more comic books being translated. Therefore, the problem being addressed in this research today, in this presentation, is the translation strategies employed in the translation of humor and onomatopoeia in the comic series Avengers: The Enemy Within.
The purpose of this study is to identify and describe the comic book translation strategies employed in the translation of onomatopoeia and humor in Avengers: The Enemy Within, as well as to analyze the extent to which the target text renders a foreignized, domesticated, or localized translation. This then leads us to our research questions, the main one being, which are the strategies used to translate onomatopoeia and humor in Avengers: The Enemy Within, and the sub-questions of what are the differences between foreignization, domestication, and localization, as well as up to what extent does the text render a foreignized, domesticated, or localized translation?
The type of research being presented today is qualitative. It is a case study which takes a setting, onomatopoeia, and humor, because these are the areas in which the behavior we're interested in is being displayed, it's being seen. And it takes as a participant the specific comic, the chosen comic book, Avengers: The Enemy Within, because it is its behavior what we're analyzing. The data collection method is note-taking, and the data was analyzed using the star list method because it allows one to use a preliminary organizing framework. The starting codes are divided into two groups, one for onomatopoeia and another one for humor.
In terms of limitations, having a non-human sample asked of us to have a data collection method that is applicable to it because it does not allow us to carry interviews or surveys like a human sample would. In terms of the limitation, we focus on comic books as a specific medium, and even more specific is our focus into the comic book Avengers: The Enemy Within as the one we are analyzing. An important ethical concern that we found during the research is the existence of amateur translations, which do not comply to the norms of comic publications, nor do they comply to the norms of professional translations. Now, as a closing segment of part one, we have significance, where first and foremost, to this day, at an institutional level, there has not been a thesis paper written on the translation of comic books, the one being presented today. Therefore, this research becoming a part of the ISL's library collection will be a great place to start for future students that could be also interested in this topic. And lastly, we know that comic books are surrounded by the stigma of being lesser than other mediums because of their believed target audience. But this study shows that comics can not only be enjoyed by younger audiences, but older ones as well.
In part two, we will be covering the theory of this research. According to Robert C. Harvey, comics are texts consisting of pictorial narratives or expositions in which words, which are often lettered into the picture area and then again within the speech balloons, usually contribute to the meaning of the pictures and vice versa. They affect and they influence each other. Comics have a unique vocabulary that accompanies them, and there are four terms you need to be familiar and understand in order to understand the research that we are presented today and later on the analysis. The first one you will see on screen is panels. They are the multiple square and rectangle shaped forms that appear on a comic book page, and in them, the scenes of a comic book take place. Next, we have speech balloons. They are items containing the majority of the linguistic elements that represent what the characters are saying. They contain the dialogue. In the case of balloons or thought bubbles, they are also items containing linguistic elements, but in this case, what the characters are thinking. The last vocabulary is not on screen, but you still need to know it, is issue. Now, in comic book terms, issue refers to the serial magazine style format in which a comic book is being released or published.
Comic books fall under the branch of audiovisual translation, and as Chiaro states, it is the practice of the interlingual transfer of verbal language when it is transmitted and accessed both visually and acoustically. Essentially, at its core, audiovisual translation shares the same translation process as any other branch. It starts with a source text written in a source language, and it results in a target text written in a chosen target language. Now, regarding comic book translations, multimodality plays a key role. As it is stated by Klaus Kendall, multimodal texts are those that rely on language, image, sound, and music as some of their various semiotic vehicles. It is then through the careful combination of these modes that meaning is achieved. So, translators then have to consider other modes besides only language, seeing as that one is only one of many possible modes. Now, the structure of comic books themselves is composed of three main elements. we have the linguistic elements, which occur inside speech balloons, as you can see on the screen in the example. Then we have the typographic elements, which are usually found outside of the speech balloons. In this case, it would be what it's written on the background. And finally, we have the pictographical elements, which are the characters or actions that occur inside a panel. And in this case, it would be the presence of Captain Marvel within the panel.
The first comic book aspect to cover is onomatopoeia, and according to Garces, onomatopoeias are combinations of sounds in a word that imitates or suggests what the word refers to. They play a very important role in comic books because they convey meaning and are a major aspect of analysis and translation because they can vary from culture to culture as representations of sounds are not universal. Onomatopoeia poses two main challenges when translating them. The first one is multimodality. Multimodality can be seen because onomatopoeias can occur inside and outside of speech bubbles. When they are found outside of speech bubbles, they pose a financial issue which is resolved with a linguistic solution. The issue concerns the way publishing houses distribute the budget and whether or not this one allows for pictorial or pictographical modifications. The solution in this case is to keep the onomatopoeia as it is in its source language form and rely on the pictorial elements to carry the meaning with the way they relate to the linguistic elements. The second issue or the second challenge would be the lack of a target language equivalent. In this case, the target language lacks a sound with a very highly specific meaning. Again, this stems from the difference in phonetic systems across languages because they vary greatly culture to culture. And in this case, the solution is to once again maintain the onomatopoeia in its source language form and rely on the pictorial elements to carry the meaning.
In comic books, humor is born from multimodality and can be found in single panels or short sequences of panels, according to Sanetin. Um, Humor also contains two main challenges, one also being multimodality, where the difficulty depends on how much the humor relies on the interaction between the elements or the sign play. And then there is, of course, the sociocultural challenge, which happens because references and information that resonate with the target culture of the source text are even higher when humor is included. Now, the goal, of course, is to maintain the comic tone that is assumed by the readers to have prior to buying a comic or after being familiar with some issues. Now, moving on to translating strategies. Regardless of which one is chosen, the aim is, of course, to achieve the best translated version of a comic book in the eyes of the target culture. When choosing a translator strategy, translators, of course, must take into consideration the expectations and tastes of the new cultural context, but at the same time, they also need to comply to the orders of the publishing houses in the target culture, which have a great deal of influence and are in charge of and make decisions regarding the translation and adaptation of comic books. Now, the best way to understand the translation strategies is to think of them as having degrees of modification that range from a minimal amount of changes to as many changes as necessary.
The strategy leading to the mildest modifications is foreignization, and according to Rota, with foreignization, the comic keeps as far as possible its original cultural and editorial characteristics. Therefore, it highlights the nature of the comic book. But as you can see on screen right now, minor adjustments do occur, in this case, in the subtitle of the comic book. Another reason why organization would be chosen is the target readership's awareness of the original creative intent, because in this case, they prefer to see how the comic book will look like in the source text instead of having their preferences being met. The second modification and the one that takes the second strategy, sorry, second strategy is domestication, and this one takes the modifications a step further. With this one, comics are published in a form which fits the tastes of the target culture, and it is mainly used in culturally dominant countries. Regardless of the original characteristics of the comic book, in this case, the target audience will get their preferences met, as you can see on screen right now.
Now, finally, the strategy with the largest degree of modification is localization. And according to Sanetin, the process involves taking a product and making it linguistically and culturally appropriate to the target locale where it will be used. Now, the techniques used in localization coincide with those used in audiovisual translation, thanks to the focus it has on media that contains both verbal and also graphic elements, making localization a compatible strategy to translate comic books. Now, the tools employed in both the analysis of onomatopoeia and humor are taken from Professor of Translation Klaus Kendall's body of work. First, the tool to analyze the translation of onomatopoeia is a framework for the study of comics, and it aims to create a typology of translation procedure for comic books. It is composed of 6 strategies, several of which can be applied to individual elements within the same panel or picture because they might complement each other in that specific case, allowing then for a simultaneous use of strategy.
Before explaining the strategies, I want to clarify that in this case, they are not organized in least to most modifications being applied as opposed to the previous one. With repetitio, the elements being either typographical, pictorial, pictographical, or linguistic remain the same as they were in the source text. Deletio leads to a complete removal of elements, of any type of element, while detractio removes elements but a minor scale in a lesser way that deletio does. An example of this would be the image of a gun or a knife being removed from the source text because in this case the target culture would find it offensive. In the case of adjectio, this strategy leads to new linguistic or pictorial elements being added to the target text that were not previously found in the source text. Transmutatio leads to a change in the order of either source language or source pictorial elements. In the case of source language, you can notice this in translations of Western translations of Japanese comics or manga because the book itself would be in one way or another flipped, so we can read from front to back as we're used to here. And the last strategy, substitutio, leads to a replacement of elements, of any type of elements, with more or less equivalent material.
Now, the tool to analyze the translation of humor is a framework that focuses on multimodality and monomodality. It encompasses not only the verbal, but also the non-verbal dimension of humor in the translation of comics. Um, it aims to indicate the multimodal meaning of humor instances and how they would affect the translation. This tool contains 3 main features of analysis. We have multimodal, monomodal, and no humor. As you can see highlighted on the table, the 3 features can create a total of 8 different combinations.
The third part of this analysis of this presentation will cover the analysis of both onomatopoeia first and later humor. The first instance of onomatopoeia shows the usage of substitutio as you can see on the table. In this case, the letter H in the source text is being replaced by the letter S in the target text, and this is probably rooted in the fact that in Spanish, the letter H is a voiceless phoneme, and for the onomatopoeia to be properly read, we need a voice phoneme such as S. The second instance of onomatopoeia shows the use of repetitio as a strategy, and when taking a look into meaning, this is a very strange choice of strategy. Because in English, the onomatopoeic form iag represents disgust, while in Spanish it carries no meaning whatsoever. And in fact, a proper reading of the onomatopoeia in Spanish might be even impossible. In Spanish, the letter E has the sound of the letter E in enter, the first E in enter, as opposed to the letter E in neon or eon. To continue, the intervocalic position of the letter Y in the onomatopoeia indicates that it would act as a consonant in Spanish if one were to read it. In this case, it would have the sound, a similar sound to that of the letter J in July, as opposed to the letter Y in you. And the reading in Spanish would probably be edu instead of ia. For these reasons, the suggestion we are proposing is ew, even though it is not identically in a phonetical sense to the first onomatopoeia, to the original onomatopoeia, but it will actually carry the meaning to the Spanish audience.
Now, the third instance presents three strategies, as you can see marked on the table. First, we have adjectio, which ensures that the proper exclamation marks in Spanish is respected, so an opening one is added, that is highlighted in red to the right side of the presentation. Then, the use of detractio eliminates the 5 repeated H from the source text onomatopoeia, which are replaced thanks to finally substitutio with 4 A's. As can be seen, the translated onomatopoeia contains only 6 letters in comparison to the 7 in the source text. This is done to use the extra space to add the opening exclamation mark that Spanish requires. And finally, the fourth instance of onomatopoeia shows the use of adjectio and substitutio. Adjectio is employed in the same manner as before to add the opening exclamation mark to follow the grammatical rules. And substitutio leads to two different changes. First, it is the switch from uppercase A's to lowercase a's. And then the second change is that from the letter H to the letter R. This change ignores the direct equivalent of the letter H in Spanish, which would be the letter J, resulting in a phonetically different sound. However, it is possible that ja was not used as the equivalent because it is extremely familiar to the textual representation of laughter in Spanish. Thus, the suggestion we present is simply since it avoids the use of the letter J and its possible misunderstanding, while also maintaining the fighting expression that fits Thor's face.
We will now begin with the analysis of humor. And the first instance of humor shows the use of technique E because the semiotic type is maintained, the multimodal humor remains as multimodal humor. Because in both versions, when Captain Marvel says making sure you were real, she, you need the previous panel to understand what she was referring to. You need the image of her touching Jessica's or Spider Woman's face to understand what she was meaning by real. As you can see on the table, the humor technique is maintained because the humor technique is actually changed. I'm sorry, the humor technique is actually changed because even though it still derives from the source text, the usage is not fully similar. When Spider Woman says Spider Woman keeping it real since, this is based on time, while in the target text she says Spider Woman real como, and this is based on a comparison. I'm explaining here, I'm talking about what will follow those phrases she's being cut in the dialogue. However, the language picture relation highlighted in red on the table, can you go back? The language picture relation highlighted in red on the table is still similar because the nature of the relation between pictorial and linguistic elements is maintained in the target text. May I ask for time? I need to charge my computer. I thought it was going to stay with me. Can I have some time?
Yes, go ahead quickly.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Would you go to the next slide, please?
The second instance?
Yes, this is the first. Okay. The second instance of humor shows the use of technique E, multimodal humor to multimodal humor, and technique A, monomodal humor to monomodal humor, because we can find both types of humor in this instance. Multimodal humor can be found in the first two panels, because when Spider-Woman says, "This is worse than high school," we need the previous panel to understand she is referring to the disgusting alien spread. In this case, after that first instance, the remaining panels all include monomodal humor. So both techniques are used. Technique E is highlighted in purple, technique A in baby blue. However, no. The humor technique is also similar because the nature of the banter is maintained. The banter they're both having in the entire exchange is maintained, as well as the phrase of it in the target text. In terms of language picture relation, this is also kept because the relation between the panels and what they're referring to, what their dialogue is about, is still maintained in the target text.
Finally, in the last instance of humor, the translation strategy employed is C, which would be monomodal humor to no humor at all. The decision to spell please as police in the source text informs the reader of the tone and the intention of Spider Woman. She is annoyed, but the readers can tell there is a lightness to her comment. In the target text, however, this meaning is just lost by the decision to translate the phrase as "oh, por favor," without an equivalent spelling that would indicate the manner in which it is uttered. The comment in the original translation sounds serious. It gives the impression that Spider Woman is actually irritated at the old lady. Now, the expression we suggest is sí, claro, because it matches the onomatopoeia pa with p, while also maintaining the light tone of the original expression by elongating the e sound in sí. The expression then sounds more sarcastic and playful, which the original translation failed to achieve.
The final part of this presentation will cover the findings, and later we will share some final thoughts. In the case of onomatopoeia, the strategies used to translate it were substitutio, repetitio, adjectio, and distractio, meaning 4 out of a total of 6 strategies. While in the case of humor, you can see on screen they were only 3 strategies, technique A, technique C, and technique E, respecting monomodal humor to monomodal humor, monomodal to no humor, and multimodal humor to multimodal humor.
Besides the main findings, the research also demonstrated that the main aspect and point of comparison between the translating strategies are the degrees of modification they apply to the source text. And finally, after careful consideration, it was concluded that it was neither domestication nor localization, which were employed in the translation. Avengers, The Enemy Within was completely translated using foreignization strategy. This is clear because the target text varied very little in terms of foreign elements as well as its editorial characteristics.
As some final thoughts, we want to highlight and emphasize on the diversity of the translation field because it has branches that ranges from ones where jargon is key, such as legal, finance, and medical, to a more creative and artistic one, such as audiovisual translation, in which the translation of comic books is included. These are the sources that were included in the presentation today, and we've reached the end. Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you, Paula and Marina. Now we're going to go ahead and have some questions for you. First of all, I would like to call on Professor Nunez to ask you a question or two regarding your work.
Thank you, Dr. Canese. Hello, Marina. Hello, Paula. I
Hello.
enjoyed your presentation very much. And I was, while I was listening to you, I was wondering what of all the different strategies, the translation strategies that you have encountered, which one was for you the most challenging in terms of audience? I mean, that our Paraguayan audience would understand or could not understand. What were the most difficult ones? I don't know if you
I
understand my
guess
question.
I think the most difficult to understand or find would probably be localization in terms of translating strategies, because it is a strategy that has a lot of steps. Let's say um, it takes a group of people to do it. It's not simply just one translator working on it, depending on what localization is being applied to. Because as we stated, it can be applied to many things, not just comics. So depending on what it is, you need, if it's a software that needs translation, you would need people that know about coding. You would need people that know about software in general, besides only the translator. So it is a strategy that takes a lot of effort, let's say, and it would be hard to find in specifically here. It would be hard to find, I think, people that would use it.
I see. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Nunez. Professor Mento?
Well, ladies, congratulations on a wonderful work. And I was interested in your sources because comics are not something that you run into in the, I don't know, in the store around the corner, right? So I was wondering about your sources. How did you come up with sources for this work, and how did you find the comic books and the translation you were going to use, and that aspect of the work?
Well, you are totally right. Comics themselves are not something easy to find if you don't know where to look for here in Paraguay. There are stores that do sell them, but if you don't know them, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? And the same thing occurs with resources and sources for a research on comic book, a thesis on comic book. We were lucky enough to be already familiar with this comic book, to have a the original comic book, and then get in touch with the copy of the translated version of it. And in terms of sources, we did a thorough um, research, made sure that the people who were working on the papers and the worked on the papers that we were using were very familiar with comic books. In fact, Klaus Kendall, he's a professor of translation. He teaches, I believe it was at a university in Vienna, but he's very familiar with comic books. The frameworks we used from him are focused on comic books. The one that is for Onomatopoeia is the title of that paper. The paper we took it from has uh, is titled "A Framework for the Study of Comic Translation" specifically. And the second one, the framework that we're using for the analysis of humor, we took it from a book in which he wrote a chapter, and it was everything was about the multimodality of humor in comic books. So they are scholars who do have a very deep understanding of comic books and their translation, everything that comic books entail, and every single characteristic of them. They acknowledge their multimodality and how humor can present itself in comic book not just in a verbal way, but as you have seen on in this presentation, it interacts with the images. And sometimes if you don't have the first panel, you will not understand the joke that is landing on the fourth panel in that same page.
Hmm. And the translation in Spanish that you used was translated where? Remind me.
That one is a very unfortunate case, and it doesn't just happen with this specific comic book. It is very difficult to find the names of the translators
Hmm.
translating comic books. And then again, it's sad because it's not a surprise. Translators themselves are very hardly acknowledged for their work on books of just on books of on literature books. You do not see the name of translators on the cover, not just the first page inside the book, but the cover of the book itself.
Hmm.
And in the what would be the credits page of this translated version, it had no information on the people who worked on the translation. And unfortunately, is a thing that it occurs just as it does in literature translation, in novels or literature books, fiction books.
Hmm. So we're lost about the background on the translator then. Hmm.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula and Marina. First of all, congratulations for a wonderful work. I
Thank you.
would like to, although Marina mentioned something in the beginning, I would like to ask you, what are the main implications of this work that you did for, you know, for translators, for teachers of translation, and maybe for future research?
Well, I think mainly, like I did say, it would be that for the ISL at least, it would be a great place to start for other people that could be interested in the topic. I think the translation of manga is something that I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in. And we do mention some sources that talk about them. So in the case of locally at the ISL level, I think our research paper would be a great place to start, a good place of inspiration. And in terms of other translators that are not necessarily studying, right? Um, I think it would be very informative because, like we said, audiovisual translation is not really something that it's at the forefront of translation, not necessarily. Like if you go to the movies and see one that is subtitled, it's not like at the end you would see, oh, translated by whatever person. So I think it's a study that is very informative in an area that is not usually put at the forefront of what translation as a whole is.
Well, thank you, Paula and Marina. Now we will ask you to leave the room for a few minutes while we'll deliberate, and we will call you back in a short time.
Hi.
Okay, are we ready?
Hello, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank
Do
you.
you have the recording back, Christian?
Yes.
Okay, so we, Marina and Paula, we are pleased to tell you that you passed with flying colors. You receive a 5 and llámame licenciada, so you're now our colleague. Congratulations. We are very proud of the work you did. Like I said, this is, and like you said yourselves, this is going to be a really good inspiration for other students to take this kind of work seriously, but maybe not take such a long time to do it. I can help saying this, but I understand we had the pandemic in between and too many things happen. But we're really proud of the work that you presented, and we're happy that you're now finally able to finish and get your diplomas, and extremely happy. Really, really very proud of you.
Thank you.
I,
Thank you so
I
much.
just want to say that, and I don't say this to many students, you wowed me. So
That's
congratulations.
great
you.
to hear. Thank you so
I
much.
really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm
Well,
glad.
I'm very glad to hear that because to be able to share this, to be able to research on something that we really just love reading, comic books themselves, and know that the audience, well, you and the fourth of you, in this case, enjoyed reading about it, that it gives you a lot of joy because you spend a lot of time writing and worrying whether or not it would work out and overthinking a lot of times as well. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
I want
It
to
was
invite
worth
you
it.
to present your results
Mhm.
at the Congreso de Lingüística Aplicada, which is going to be held in November. So you have until next week to submit your abstract. It's the same abstract that you have on your thesis, and same keywords, same people, you, and you just have to go to the Congress site, which is compla.org, and submit your abstract, your title, your names, your emails, and then the presentation. You will present a shortened version of what you did. So it would be half the time. So maybe you can choose to only present one of the aspects if you want, or cut down on the preliminary things and focus more on the analysis. But I think this is going to be a great addition to our program. So please, I'm not asking you to consider presenting. I'm telling you to please present.
Okay, let me give you the Spanish closure and then we can continue talking.
Okay.
Esto ha sido entonces la defensa de tesis de Marina y de Paula. Estamos felices por el 5 la nota 5 que ellas